Well, howdy do, buckaroos. This is Joe Layden of Cowboys and Indians magazine. And the name of the nature documentary is American Horses. And it will be broadcast on Wednesday, February 23rd on PBS. And today it's my pleasure to be speaking to two of the gentlemen who are producers of this special, Eric Bendick and Fred Kaufman. So first off, good morning to you, sirs. And not to be a nag, I'm sorry, I couldn't resist that one. What drew you to this particular documentary? I mean, is this kind of a sequel to a previous nature documentary, Equus, the story of the horse?
Well, in a way it is. We've been doing horse shows going back decades, and one of our most popular and favorite shows was based on Cloud, which was a Mustang in the Pryor Mountains. And we did about 3 films on Cloud and his band. And people love meeting these horses and hearing about them and watching them. And then we did Equus, and that did really well. And the audience, people bond with horses in a very, very special way, more so than just about any other animal. And I know very little about horses. I'm not a horseman. I know embarrassingly little about them. But after Equus, and which was a kind of global look at these horses, I thought, what about the real specific American breeds, like the Mustang and Appaloosa? And let's just do a show on those. We don't have to travel the world. Let's keep it to this kind of continent and learn about these horses and how they help shape this nation. And so that really was the beginning of it.
And Joe, to chime in, kind of to pick up where Fred left off, Equus was really an evolutionary story about the origins of the horse, and nestled, deep within that framework, there was this idea, the kernel of a spectacular idea in my mind, which was that the horse evolved for the most part in North America, and the modern horse, the contemporary horse that we know today, evolved here in North America. And yet there was this incredible suspense to the story as well, because the horse disappeared here for 10,000 years. And so with the return of the horse to North America, we had something that I think was very fresh, very exciting to contemplate, which was a sort of a homecoming and a celebration of the American horse. So when we dug in deeper to the story and we started to understand this kind of evolutionary lineage that's over 40 million years old, and then the return of horses only a few hundred years ago to this continent, it was very kind of a special moment as a storyteller to kind of lock into that long history and that long evolution, and then also to see how these new breeds and this kind of explosion of new diversity in the United States that was the product of both humans and horses was so special.
Now, you mentioned the relationship between humans and horses, and that's always been something that's fascinated me. I mean, I'm more of a cat person, I have to say. And if my cat doesn't trust me, well, that's fine. She can eat the food or not. I mean, I don't have to worry about, my cat trampling me or anything like that. But with a horse, I mean, you really have to develop, in one of a better term, a relationship. I mean, you realize here's this huge animal that will allow you to, actually get on its back and will carry you around. Is that, also part of the unique bonding? I mean, unless you're talking about taking pony rides at the carnival, I mean, there's really nothing else that matches that, is there?
No, it's a completely unique relationship between humans and horses, where this animal is way more powerful than we are. It's capable of, being a threat to us, or at least reacting defensively in a way that could injure you, could really be dangerous to be around. And yet there is this relationship that develops, and that's something we tried to explore in the film. It's something we explored both through the relationships that horses in the wild have with other horses, because there are hierarchies that develop and there are relationships. And some of those social relationships and that intelligence that the horse has maps over to the human horse relationship. And I think that's kind of a new frontier for understanding, how we as humans and how horses relate to us. And what you notice about people who eat, sleep, and breathe horses and have these relationships, they are as into the horses as that it is mutual. They're in this relationship where they both have an understanding and a trust of one another, and that trust develops over time. It does not develop in an afternoon or in a few sessions. It develops over years and years and years, and I think that's what makes the horse-human relationship so unique and rewarding for both humans and horses.
Now, the documentary, focuses on specific breeds of horses and what makes them unique. And, while going back, looking at the history of these particular breeds, like, for example, the Appaloosa, were the things that surprised you? I mean, did you say, oh, I never would have thought of that?
In particular, the Appaloosa was one of the most fascinating portions to explore, because the history of the Appaloosa, while there are a lot of kind of contemporary histories of our Appaloosa as it was registered in the 20th century, and then kind of that lineage, the history before that time is kind of largely unwritten. There are these accounts like from Lewis and Clark, who came across the Nez Perce and in fact were taken in by the Nez Perce, of these incredibly regal horses that were the fittest horses that they had ever seen, and how this horse culture was so evolved and so impressive that they adopted a number of those horses, and those are some of the earliest accounts, but there's just an enormous amount of that history that we actually don't really know, and we don't have a huge volume of knowledge to work with. But what we do have, and what was shared with us, is a lot of the oral tradition from the Nez Perce, based on how their horse culture evolved, and then how it's kind of being reborn now, because they really are restoring that culture to its kind of former prominence, and they are stewarding what's basically a horse culture that is incredibly rich, but was also threatened, because at one time the strength of the horse and the strength that it gave to the Nez Perce was really seen as a threat to the cavalry and to the United States westward expansion. So they've really had to restore that tradition, and through those oral traditions that we learned about, a few of the stories that we kind of turned up, if you will, some of those stories had really not been spoken about to the outside world. So very exciting.
Well, now both of you gentlemen have obviously learned a lot about horses during your involvement with these documentaries. Because you have this knowledge, does this kind of make you skeptical or maybe even laugh out loud sometimes when you see certain scenes in movies where, people just jump on wild horses and suddenly the horse says, oh, okay, yeah, you can ride me around. I keep going back to, there's a scene in this Elvis Presley Western Charo, where he's been, manhandled by his former comrades and left out, in the wasteland. And he just happens to come across a wild horse and he lassos the wild horse. And a couple of minutes later, I'm thinking, what did he do? I mean, when we weren't looking, did he sing to the horse or something? I mean, and more recently on in 1883, which is a terrific show, but the last episode they wrangled a bunch of wild Mustangs, and the next thing you know, people who have never ridden horses in their lives are riding them around. It's like, nah, I don't think that would happen.
Well, I'm I'm not surprised. I don't know that much about horses to really pick up on, some details, but I do know when they're making theatrical films, they're stretching things, and my favorite is always, you'll see an eagle, and because an eagle makes sort of a wimpy chirping sound, they put this beautiful whistle of a red hawk, which is a real nice cry. And they always mix those two together, that you'll see an eagle, but actually hear the cry of a hawk, because they go nicely together. So I'm not surprised by any of that.
Yeah, a lot of the movie magic that has come over the ages. I mean, we worked with a Mustang trainer who has, successfully trained 7 wild Mustangs, and she says there is no timeline for one of these Mustangs to be able to ride. It is all about the horse. It is all about that particular horse, the disposition of that horse, and then it's all about the trainer horse relationship. And one little turn or mistake can set that relationship back years. So there are Mustangs that I think are probably completely unrideable. And then there are, it's a spectrum of horses that I think from the wild that can be brought into in proximity with humans and begin a relationship with humans. So it's this whole spectrum, and you see it out there among the wild horses as well. There's so many different personalities, and we kind of think of them, we don't have enough nuance when we think about their intelligence and kind of their individuality.
It's funny, and I don't mean this as a diss of any other breed of horse. So, horse fanciers, please don't, write angry emails to me. But it seems to me, and your documentary, leans into this. There's something we were talking about, the unique relationship between humans and horses. The Mustang seems to have a unique position in our culture. I mean, the idea of it's always the wild Mustang that's out there riding around on the plains. And, I'm sure there are wild quarter horses out there somewhere. But, the Mustang seems to, there's so many football teams, and, automobiles named after them, what is there, you think, that makes our culture, even people who'd never ride a horse in their lives, hold the Mustang in this almost in awe?
Well, Joe, let me take a shot at that, and then I'll hand it to Eric, because when proposing this idea to Eric and his company, it came from us to see if they'd be interested in doing it. I was this close to saying, let's do an American Mustang film, because like you, I thought, well, tell me more about this animal that, we haven't hold it in such high regard. and attribute all these kind of interesting and wonderful and American attributes. What's the story here? What's the real story behind it? So the Mustang was really one of the main reasons for this show and could very easily have been the topic of the full hour. What I always find interesting, and I comment this, I'm from New York City. I'm nowhere near wild horses and knew very little about them and know very little about them.
Well, wait a minute. You could go on a buggy ride in Central Park.
Yeah.
I mean, I've done that.
Right.
I've done that too. But I always found, I've always envisioned Mustangs more like thoroughbreds. I just thought, the Mustangs are shorter. They're real kind of stocky workhorses. And I've always thought of them as, shouldn't they be more like these extraordinary thoroughbred figures that are just, oh my God, kind of intimidating and beautiful and sleek and everything. And so for me, I'm always kind of like they're kind of shorter and stumpier and wider than what I'm picturing. So that was always a surprise to me. Anyway, Eric,
yeah. No, it's super, super fascinating. And actually I think, before horses mysteriously went extinct 10,000 years ago, the horses that were here resembled donkeys. They resembled like wild asses, zebras. So they were these like shorter, stockier, more mule-like animals. And you can see in the Mustangs that are out on the landscape now that in some ways they are kind of trending or evolving towards that simplified form, this more kind of wild form. And our workhorses and our race horses and our very majestic horses that we've bred have kind of taken very different paths. So it is fascinating to think, like, why is there this incredible mystique about the Mustang? I think a huge part of that is because they were the first to return. They were, kind of the origin and the source of so many horses that came after. And when they did return, they did so with, incredible success. So they basically, spilled out of a few places in Mexico, in the Southwest, and then there were millions of wild horses throughout the West. They were so successful that they literally exploded all over the landscape. And so I think there's kind of a legacy of that idea that there's this animal that really fits like a glove into this landscape, and that mystique is still there. And the reality when you go to a place like the Pryor Mountains, like we film, and you see these horses migrating up to the top of a mountain after a winter spent down in the desert, and you see this kind of huge congregation of wild horses, it is definitely on par with any wildlife spectacle that I've ever seen. It's as dramatic and intense as any huge bison herd or the moose rut or anything up there. So it really deserves that reputation.
You gentlemen have been very generous with your time. And one last question. It's kind of a two-part question. Okay, Fred, you're sitting in New York and you're looking at the footage that Eric is sending you. Was there ever a point where you said, how did they get that? Didn't they run the risk of somebody getting trampled out there? I mean, that looks kind of dangerous. I mean, do we have insurance on these people? I mean, and Eric, what was the most, in one of a better term, dangerous part of this documentary to film? Fred?
Well, I'll go first. And virtually every film I see, or when footage is sent to me early on, I'm always asking, how did they get that? And not so much the danger aspect, because everybody we work with, they're so responsible and careful, and safety is the number one priority. So I'm never really concerned about anybody being in danger, but rather there are just extraordinary moments where you have to be at the right place at the right time with the camera turned on to get it. And it's, so much of that is luck and experience, and so many factors that go into it. There's a scene with the Appaloosa on this sort of ridge, and with a gray sky behind them, and a lightning bolt behind them. Incredibly beautiful and dramatic, but you gotta have that camera turned on at that moment to get that. And so I'm always in awe of how the work that goes in, and the magic of getting something at the right time. I'm never, I don't know how they really do it. I mean, and sometimes filmmakers won't even tell you things because they feel proprietary thing. They won't tell you where they went specifically because they don't want anybody to know. There are times we won't mention specific locations in our films because we don't want it then overtaken by tourists. But I am in awe of the work Eric and Grizzly Creek Films have done on this. So yeah, good on them.
I think that our crew and our team is really comfortable in the wild. I think we're really comfortable on a mountaintop somewhere, whether it's grizzly bears or whether it's wild horses. That is kind of our happy place. And surprisingly, those situations feel a lot safer to us than time spent in an urban environment or something. But what I will say is that the wild portion of these shoots was there were never anything that was totally out of our league or where we felt really unsafe. In proximity to some of these horses, in close quarters. For example, we were working with Mike Miller, who is the rancher portrayed in the scene, and he in turn was basically trimming the hooves of a really young quarter horse that had been handled maybe twice ever. And so we're in proximity to him, and he is literally riding this animal to avoid getting kicked. And he's kind of using all his knowledge and strength and expertise. And, he's not a spring chicken, he's 70 years old. So those were the situations where we were just praying that, everyone would stay safe. But these trainers and, these individuals, they know the horse behavior so well that we just tried to follow their lead. When they told us it was safe to be there, we just went for it. And when they started to perk their ears a bit up, we would just back off, let things settle down, and then come back in. So there were times that were a little bit of a rodeo, but it was a lot of fun.
Well, and besides, this wasn't your first rodeo, so you knew.
That's right.
Yeah, I'm sorry I couldn't resist that one either. The name of the documentary is American Horses. It is part of the Nature series. It will be on PBS on Wednesday, February 23rd. Again, PBS, free TV. So thank you very much, gentlemen. And it's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you.